2010 was a landmark year for Doctor Who. After 5 triumphant years of Russell T Davies at the helm, it was time for the first transition of power since the early 1980s. Fans had grown used to the dramatic, thrilling, modern approach to the revived show, so it would always be a massive task to maintain the show's popularity under a completely new production team. Luckily for everyone, the decision of who to appoint a showrunner was an easy one. Within those 5 years, Stephen Moffat had provided the most consistent scripts, all 4 of his stories considered some of the best within their respective series. Not only would Moffat have to continue sailing the ship, but he also had the task of casting a new Doctor, a new companion, and wrangling a select handful of writers and directors to help him achieve his grand vision after years of dreaming about being in charge of Doctor Who. This all formed the backdrop for the all-important Series 5, which would serve as a new jumping on point for audiences, reintroducing core concepts about the show, along with incorporating a more focused and direct series-long arc to keep new viewers engaged. Since its release, Series 5 has become one of the most popular series of Doctor Who, with many considering it the best of the modern era. But as I'm sure you found out by now, I don't really rate it. Why not? Well, let's find out. It's time to review Doctor Who Series 5. Part 1. New face, same Doctor. First, let's start with a positive. The 11th Doctor is one of the best parts about Series 5. A lot of people instantly refused him because he wasn't David Tennant, but I think by the end of the 11th hour it's hard to dispute that Matt Smith is simply the Doctor. His characterization of the Time Lord is enough of a departure from his predecessor that he feels simultaneously familiar and fresh, which is exactly what the series needed. The 11th Doctor isn't the dramatic and tragic action hero the 10th Doctor was. Instead, he's a whimsical, socially awkward man rattling around the universe trying to have fun. He has plenty of quirks and goofiness, but he's not one-dimensional. There's still a lot of nuance within the portrayal. Smith shows a lot of inner darkness and conflict, often having the same outbursts as David Tennant's take on the character, so that intensity is still there. The reason I love this eclectic mix of old and new is that it allows you to be certain that this is still the same character. Even though the face and the personality has changed, this is still the Doctor. And I know it's a bit of trivia beaten to death by this point, but despite Smith not being a Doctor Who fan, he based a lot of his portrayal on the second Doctor, which clearly manifests during many episodes. It's hard not to love the 11th Doctor. Even though he has his fair share of flaws and issues, he is the Doctor, plain and simple. He carries all the wisdom of such an old character, and some of his actions show an evolution from the 2 previous Doctors. He still has that hatred of the Daleks, but the way he handles Amy and Rory's relationship is clearly influenced by that of Rose and Mickey's, so there's a lot of continuity within the incarnation that helps to keep him consistent and approachable. I think one of his standout episodes is The Lodger. Since it's a companion light story, Smith is able to hold the spotlight and explore the 11th Doctor's wacky, socially awkward side as he attempts to fit in with normal people as Craig's roommate. He has so many fun scenes in the story, and the setup perfectly suits such an eccentric incarnation. I will admit I prefer almost all the other modern Doctors, but 11 is still a very strong version of the character with plenty of memorable moments allowing him to stand on his own, even if some moments like the Pandorica speech feel more suited for the 10th Doctor. Matt Smith definitely carries a lot of episodes in Series 5, making them more bearable than they otherwise would have been, so he's a shining light in the series for me. Part 2. Awful Amy Pond. Someone I'm not nearly as fond of is Amy Pond, the new companion played by Karen Gillan. Now, I will preface this section by saying Gillan does a great job, it's just the writing of the character I have massive issues with. Gillan herself is wonderful, with amazing chemistry alongside Smith. They play off each other really well, with the same kind of witty banter that made the 10th Doctor and Donna an iconic duo. Amy's premise is also good, allowing for that soft reboot of sorts, giving people a new audience surrogate who has to learn everything about the Doctor. However, my main issue with Amy is that she's incredibly unlikable. Now, I know there's a character arc and I will get to that, but I never found myself caring about Amy in the same way I had about the previous companions. She mistreats a lot of people around her, especially Rory, and she has a very laissez-faire attitude to the adventures. Just look at the scene in Vampires of Venice where she's captured by Rosanna and bitten. Instead of being rightfully scared like any rational person would be, Amy instead cracks one-liners about being from Ofsted, which takes all the drama out of the scene. This constantly happens, her just brushing off anything dramatic and never really questioning her place as a companion.
After they've wiped out the human race.
Right.
preferred it when I didn't know, to be honest.
Something important that happened with the other three was having a clear moment of doubt in their decision to go along with the mysterious stranger. Rose had End of the World, Martha had Gridlock, and Donna had Planet of the Ood. With Amy though, she actively wants to run away, so she never has that moment and almost lacks self-awareness. I mean, rather than her wanting to leave in the Beast Below, it's the Doctor wanting to kick her out, so there's a disconnect there. In addition to this, it takes a really long time for her to actually do something. She spends the first few episodes as a bit of an afterthought, not really contributing much, which is really weird for a new companion. I just think Series 5 drops the ball with Amy, and I never came around to caring about her because of how she was written in the series. In a strange way, I feel like she's too much of a character, rather than feeling like a real person. It's hard to treat her like an audience surrogate because she doesn't really personify the audience. She's way too Moffat-y. I have a much easier time imagining Martha Jones or Sarah Jane exist in the real world. But Amy on the other hand feels like a character in a story. And I get that that's kind of the point. But even her whole storybook arc doesn't really work.
We have to grow up eventually.
Says who?
As plenty of people were quick to point out in the comments of my 11th hour review, Amy Pond is meant to begin the series as unlikable for her treatment of Rory. Indeed, Series 5 tells a wider character story of her accepting their relationship. Episodes like Amy's Choice and the Silurian two-parter use his death as a wake-up call for Amy to realise she never knew what she had until it was gone. The payoff to all this is her finally accepting her marriage rather than running away from it. All her commitment issues are meant to be a grand thematic story because of the Doctor never coming back for her. But I don't think it works at all. In the 11th hour she wants to bonk the Doctor, and in the Big Bang she still wants to bonk the Doctor. It doesn't really feel like a satisfying character narrative because the growth isn't clear enough. I can't help but feel like Amy should have been a one-series companion. That's not because I don't like the character, but because it makes more sense with the imaginary friend storyline. It would have been a very powerful ending to have Amy stop running from her life alongside having to move on from her imaginary friend. Her wishing the Doctor back into existence kind of renders all the personal stakes of the Big Bang moot, because he went through that whole emotional sequence with Amy just to come back anyway, without any consequence. I know it would have been frustrating to have back-to-back companions forgetting the Doctor, but I would much prefer if the climax of the Big Bang had Amy's life with Rory and her parents costing her the Doctor. He'd still exist, but she'd think all the adventures were simply stories, just like that one speech set up. There's a much more interesting idea there, but instead we get a badly executed story of Amy's weird attachment issues. Even Amy's Choice fumbles the titular choice because both scenarios were dreams, so it never really mattered. Amy's character arc feels empty, to the extent that they have to re-clarify it all again at the beginning of Series 6.
I wasn't sure who you were talking about, me or
Him.
This arc was overcomplicated for dramatic effect, so it completely falls flat and it just makes you remember the worst parts of how she was written, rather than the better parts. Rory, on the other hand, is a complete Chad. Arthur Darvill is by far the unsung hero of Series 5, making Rory such a lovable, relatable goofball with the perfect zero to hero story arc. I've already made a video all about that arc, but I once again want to stress how much I love Rory in the series. He's honestly too good for Amy, especially after guarding her in the Pandorica for almost 2,000 years when she really doesn't deserve it. Rory is essentially the true audience surrogate, the straight man of the Doctor companion dynamic. He's the outsider who always makes snarky comments and calls the Doctor out because he's more grounded than the Doctor and Amy, who don't take things as seriously.
A weird new star, 14 minutes left to live and only one man to save the day? I just wanted a nice village and a family.
Darvill and Smith have such an underrated chemistry which shines in episodes like the Pandorica opens, the pair sharing some truly great scenes together. Rory starts the series hating the Doctor, partly out of jealousy and also out of protectiveness for Amy, but the Doctor makes sure to bring him on board for adventures so Rory can realise there isn't some kind of love triangle competition and they can just get along. The Doctor remembers what went wrong with his involvement in Rose and Mickey's relationship, so this is a good evolution of that, a nice subtle arc within the series, letting Rory grow in confidence and become the ultra Chad he was always destined to be, even if it did take dying twice to get there. I really wish we could have had some adventures with just the Doctor and Rory, because it's a dynamic people really don't give enough attention. They play off each other so well and it can make for some wonderful episodes. Hey Big Finish, you listening? Part 3. The series arc. Much like the 4 previous series, Series 5 has an ongoing narrative arc that culminates in the finale. However, unlike those Davis arcs, the Cracks in Time storyline is a lot more obvious. Right from the get-go, the Doctor is aware of the mystery, coming across the crack in Amy's wall, before we see it hidden away in the Beast Below, Victory of the Daleks and the Lodger. However, rather than continuing on with little glimpses like we would have in earlier series, Flesh and Stone centres entirely around this crack, delving into the origin and the effects of it, something furthered by the dramatic ending of Cold Blood. I really like the idea of a more overt story arc. It ties the series together really well and drops breadcrumbs along the way rather than Easter eggs that ultimately don't really matter. You get a proper sense of a mystery slowly unravelling as the Doctor learns about the cracks bit by bit, each time feeling like a rewarding sense of progression. You actually have to watch most episodes in the series to understand what's going on in the finale, so it creates a better sense of importance and cohesion. You never know when the next part of the mystery will appear, like the debris in Cold Blood, so it's an engaging story feeling more involved rather than episodes loosely connected together. However, I'm personally not a fan of the conclusion of this arc. The Pandorica opens is a wonderful setup, creating huge stakes and tying back to previous episodes, but the Big Bang is just so disappointing. It's full of technobabble as the script desperately tries to justify its ridiculous universe reset payoff. The episode itself is a confusing mess of brilliant ideas awkwardly jostling for screen time without really making any sense at all. There are so many fallacies and the characters stand around explaining things the whole time just to try and execute the leaps of logic required to rationalise the ending. Yes, the whole crack in time storyline is paid off by the Doctor flying the Pandorica into the exploding TARDIS so that it can reconstruct the exact same universe as before, all with a few billion atoms from inside the Pandorica. It takes suspension of disbelief to a new level and makes for an unsatisfying payoff, especially because Amy uses the power of wishes to bring the Doctor back, so there's literally no consequence to the entire finale. Even Last of the Time Lord has the Master dying, but the Big Bang actually brings people back to life, so there's no sense of the bittersweet victory most Doctor Who finales have. Oh, and don't even get me started on the whole exploding TARDIS thing. It's not Series 5's fault, but the revelation of the silence being responsible makes absolutely no sense. Blowing up the TARDIS and therefore the entire universe when the Doctor isn't even inside? What? How does that help them when they'd also be dead? It just makes the whole Cracks in Time story arc a complete disaster in my opinion. It would make so much more sense for River to betray the Doctor in the Series 5 finale to set up all the silent stuff, rather than this confusing run around universe reset with an alliance of Doctor Who monsters that goes absolutely nowhere. Part 4. Bridging the Gap. One of the most important things Series 5 needed to do was bridge the gap between Davis and Moffat. It's quite illuminating when you compare the episode structure in the Monsters Series 5 to that of the rest of the Moffat era, because it's nothing like what followed. In order to stay within the comfortable boundaries viewers have become used to, you have 3 two-parters, an early one, a later one, and then the finale. This never happened again in the Moffat era. So it's clear that he wanted to appeal to the familiarity to get a foothold, because this is the same structure the Davis series had, complete with the celebrity historicals, which would also mostly disappear under Moffat. And to Series 5's credit, Vincent and the Doctor is by far the best celebrity historical in the entire show, providing a heartbreaking look into the tragic life of celebrated painter Vincent van Gogh. It brings him to life in a way no other famous figure has in the show, and it uses his life and mental illness as the driving force of the story, so he feels relevant and really well written.
But it seems to me there's so much more to the world than the average eye is allowed to see.
It's definitely the best episode in the series, tackling some incredibly deep themes whilst maintaining the fun and pulpy tone of the series. I am happy this was the last every series traditional celebrity historical until the Chibnall era, because it's the perfect send-off to the format, the show going on to just throw famous faces into unrelated stories without much fanfare, because that feels like the logical progression of this kind of story. I think having traditional episodes like Victory of the Daleks and Vincent and the Doctor served as a reminder that this is still the same show. If Moffat had gone straight in with his later Smith era series structures, it might have been a complete disaster because the audience wouldn't be prepared for such a change, especially with the existing skepticism of the showrunner change.
What are you doing here?
I am your soldier.
Additionally, the monsters are another indication of Moffat wanting to keep the viewers on board. In the 3rd episode, the Daleks are wheeled out, which is something people always tune in for. The whole Terry Nation contract Dalek every series stuff is basically just a conspiracy theory and it's never been proven, so we can take Victory of the Daleks as a conscious effort to keep audiences interested in the show, along with the Paradigm Daleks showing that Moffat wanted to move forward rather than letting the show stall. It's the same with the Weeping Angels. Sure, the new lore stuff sucks, but the monsters are something the public know about, and adding these changes to them prevent them from feeling like they're being used for clicks and nostalgia. Monsters are such an underrated way of bridging a production gap. We saw it with how Series 11 struggled with its no existing monsters mandate. Enough things have already changed, so sprinkling in things like Weeping Angels, Daleks, or even the Alliance help to comfort the viewers by maintaining things they already know. Victory of the Daleks is a disappointing letdown of a story, wasting a wonderful premise, and Time of Angels is pretty much the same, being completely ruined by Flesh and Stone's moving angels. But by simply having these stories in the first place, Series 5 saw a huge boost in audience appeal, and that definitely helped ease the transition. It's also why River Song is important. She was a recent addition to the Doctor Who universe, with an intriguing mystery surrounding her, so revisiting her in Series 5 is another statement of intent, promising answers if you keep watching. It's just a shame her writing is immediately insufferable, becoming a victim of Flanderization very quickly, Moffat more interested in writing her one-handedly than maintaining the intrigue of her first appearance. Even still, she's a familiar face in a crowd of unfamiliar faces, which holds the same kind of significance as Sarah Jane in season 11 and 12, giving you something to latch onto even though everyone else has changed. The actual new monsters are pretty weak, it's hard to deny. The Smilers are wasted potential and don't really fit in with the beast below. They're designed to be nightmare fuel for children, but just kind of look goofy, and they don't really feel like they belong in the incredible Starship UK setting. In a way, they're kind of a representation of the flaws of the Beast Below itself, since the episode feels a bit out of place within Series 5. It's an awkward holdover from the Davis era, trying to replicate the political commentary of episodes like The Long Game and Planet of the Ood, but a lot less effectively. The fish vampires and Vampires of Venice are also really weird, an overcomplicated way of having vampires in Doctor Who when there have already been quite a few. Whilst they fit the setting more than the Smilers, they don't seem particularly memorable or scary, which again kind of sums up the episode itself, since Vampires of Venice is incredibly bland and uneventful, full of weird writing decisions and a weak supporting cast. On the other hand, Acrophæus and Vincent and the Doctor is basically saved by the themes around it. It has some truly awful CGI, but it's redeemed by the fact it's a representation of the depression plaguing Vincent, since only he can see it in the same way only people with mental illness can see what they're suffering. Honestly, the only out and out good new villain in Series 5 is the Dream Lord from Amy's Choice. He's the perfect adversary for the Doctor because they're the same person. He's the personification of the Doctor's darker side, and Toby Jones does a wonderful job portraying this aspect. Throughout the episode, the Dream Lord is a brilliant master manipulator, constantly taunting the protagonist because he knows how to get to them.
Your brain is completely see-through, but then I've always been able to see through you, Doctor.
It's basically the Dream Lord that makes Amy's Choice such a good episode, because he's the glue holding it all together. He guides the narrative, forcefully moving the characters from place to place to keep the dream within a dream story from getting too stale. Part 5. A New Direction. Series 5 has the distinction of being the first full Doctor Who series shot and broadcast in HD. The show had played around with the format before with the Torchwood spin-off and the 2009 specials, but it wasn't until Series 5 that they went all in. I think the series being in HD adds a lot of style to it. There are some incredibly beautiful shots taking full advantage of the sharper visuals and the colour depth. It's overcooked sometimes, like in the 11th hour, which is uncomfortably sharpened and looks terrible at points, with some shoehorned in lens flare that looks try-hard rather than something the shots actually warrant. However, on the whole, Series 5 is a stunning series. It takes a little while to truly reap the rewards of HD, but once it does, it looks amazing. The production values are a far cry from the wobbly sets of Classic Who, or even the Vaseline filters of Series 1. Episodes that stand out to me are Time of Angels and Vincent and the Doctor, directed by Adam Smith and Johnny Campbell respectively. These are two magnificently filmed episodes that show Doctor Who is capable of holding its own against higher budget shows. Having everything in HD also helps the series carve out its own identity. It's a visual representation of the new era, especially because it was a brand new set of directors who hadn't worked on the show before. Even though there have been those HD episodes at the tail end of the first Davis era, the simple look of Series 5 is enough to communicate the change in showrunner and direction. So it helps keep the audience on board with the change because it's a clear move in a forward motion both on screen and off. Part 6. Trial of a Reviewer. Okay, so usually in these overall reviews, I'd give each episode a little mini review summarising what I like and dislike about them. But you can just go to my in-depth reviews for all that. Because those reviews garnered a little bit of controversy, I thought I'd instead talk about those and my ongoing tier list. So I guess this is Trial of a Harbo. Firstly, the Series 5 tier list is not so different from the Series 1 tier list. I was just as brutal with The Unquiet Dead as I was with The Beast Below, so get out of here with your accusations of some kind of anti-Moffat bias. I still stand by all my rankings, even the 11th Hour getting a B, despite me giving that same rank to maligned episodes like The Long Game and Love and Monsters. And when you look at the tier list, I've actually given a B to every single Doctor Who opening episode so far, because most of them just tend to be okay. I maintain that stance with the 11th Hour. It has a lot of fun moments and some good directing, heralding in the new era well, but both alien threats are weak, an issue easily avoided by Rose just having the pre-existing Autons. Along with this, Amy is unlikable without, and the pacing just kind of feels very stop-start because it has to explain a lot of things and set up loads of plot threads and character dynamics. It has a lot of growing pains, and that's fine, I don't blame it, but it just doesn't hit the same heights for me as it seems to do for everyone else. But remember, a B is still a good ranking. It's like a 7 out of 10, which is still high. I'm just a bit of a harsh ranker at times. This brings me to my next point. Yes, I was absolutely too lenient on some Davis era episodes. The Pandorica opens the same rank as Idiot's Lantern, Fear Her and Shakespeare Code? Yeah, that's clearly wrong and would probably require some re-tiering since I've become harsher. I took time off before the specials reviews and I came back a bit stricter. But it's important to remember I basically started this channel with defending the despised, which was, more often than not, me defending hated episodes in the Moffat era. I've always been lenient on Doctor Who because it's my favourite show, so I understand the Series 5 reviews seem like a jarring change of tone, but there are reasons behind such disproportionate rankings. I do have a first Davis era bias, but that doesn't mean I have an anti-Moffat bias. It's just a simple case of me finding Moffat's writing style easier to criticise. I like both writers, but I tend to find those first Davis era stories more rewatchable and enjoyable. That's my personal preference. Literally every reviewer in history has had them. I could easily rewatch Fear Her for a laugh because it's a fun time. I unironically adore Love and Monsters for its themes and goofiness. When you compare those to something like Vampires of Venice, I think it's safe to say the harsher rank is justified because I have no urge to revisit it. There's less of value in there and it's just a mediocre story without even having a so bad it's good appeal. On the other hand, The Lodger is a lot of fun. It doesn't take itself seriously, just telling an enjoyable rom-com story within the Doctor Who framework. It's easy to revisit and it does its job well, only suffering from some flaws with the ending. There are a lot of little unmentioned things that go into the grading system. For example, 42 would have had an E, but I enjoy seeing David Tennant and Freema Agyeman on screen, and Murray Gold contributed a great score, so those three aspects lift it up to a D rank. That's why I'm harsher on the Series 5 episodes, because I don't find myself engaging with their leads as much, and Gold's soundtrack isn't a standout, it's just I Am the Doctor on repeat, so there's less to redeem the weaker stories. I mean, Hungry Earth and Cold Blood is an absolute dumpster fire. Not only do the Silurians look terrible, but it's full of the worst chimnalisms like countdowns, weird characterizations of the leads, and a shocking sense of nothing in the story actually mattering until the ending, which is pretty much all people remember about it. It's an abysmal story, so much worse than 42 because it doesn't have the same redeeming qualities that did. As you'll find out very soon, I don't hate Moffat or Smith. I just find that the episodes don't hold up to scrutiny in the same way as the previous era, which is why the reviews and rankings were harsher. So yeah, that's my justification, and when I start praising episodes in Series 6 and 7, I hope you'll understand that. Part 7, Final Thoughts and Ranking. Series 5 had a huge mission. Doctor Who was fresh off one of the most popular eras in its entire history, so much so that there were serious discussions about cancelling it once Davis and Tennant left their respective roles. Moffat had an unenviable task on his hands, but I think he managed to make Series 5 a success. It retains enough of the traditions and structure to keep audiences on board, whilst opening up the opportunities to experiment down the line and proving the show could look beautiful in its new HD format. However, for all this work, Moffat missed the importance of tone. The first Davis era had sort of grown up with its audience, darkening throughout the years and allowing it to age better. Series 5 on the other hand stripped away a lot of that darkness and lost a lot of viewers in the important pre-teen demographic. I saw this exodus firsthand because I started secondary school in 2010 after Series 5 aired. The difference in public opinion was almost night and day. Doctor Who was suddenly once again being seen as a weird nerdy kids show, and to put it bluntly, it wasn't cool anymore. Just look at how overtly CBBC the fish fingers and custard scene is. It shows how the tone was almost reset for a younger audience. And that's a mistake that pretty much damaged the entire show going forward. Overall, I would give Doctor Who Series 5 a B rank, which is kind of fitting because there are a lot of similarities to Series 2. It tells a similar companion story as Amy struggles to balance her relationships, along with her being a bit too comfortable within the adventures, which was the same issue with Rose in Series 2, constantly making jokes and undermining dramatic moments, and just generally being unlikable. Series 2 is a bad series with a bunch of good episodes, while Series 5 is a good series with a bunch of bad episodes. As a whole, it's an enjoyable enough ride, a tight series-long arc which makes all the episodes feel important, but the individual elements of the series are weak in my opinion. Matt Smith himself is a clear highlight, doing a wonderful job as the new Doctor, immediately comfortable within the role and lending his own unique take on the character. So I feel pretty confident in saying he carries most of the series with his acting. I know my opinions on Series 5 have been controversial, but I simply feel like it suffers from a lot of teething issues due to how much it had to achieve. Sure, Moffat's overly self-indulgent writing doesn't help, but the series as a whole is mainly just weighed down by the task it needed to carry out. And that's nobody's fault, but it does hamper the quality of the series in my personal opinion. But it's just that, my opinion. And hey, Series 6 is a lot better, so maybe we can all calm down a little bit now. Oh, who am I kidding, this is the Doctor Who fanbase we're talking about. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to my Diamond level patron, Fallon Cortez, and all my Gold level patrons, Alex Marston, Basil Disco PhD, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, George, Herna Verzog, and Stefan Never Miller. Thank you so much for your support.